Hey everyone, and welcome to this deep dive. Today we're going to be exploring something super interesting.
Oh, I'm excited. What is it?
You know, we always talk about gender roles, like all those expectations of how we're supposed to act and stuff, based on whether we're a boy or a girl.
Yeah, definitely. It comes up a lot.
Well, today we're going to look at how all those ideas actually start way back in childhood.
Ooh, that's a great topic.
It's like, how do those expectations actually take root?
Yeah, like, are we born with them or are they something we learn? I'm really curious to hear what you've found.
Totally. And we often think about childhood as this universal experience. Like kids are just kids no matter where they are in the world.
Right, it's just a phase everyone goes through.
Exactly. But it turns out it's not that simple.
Huh.
Childhood can be totally different depending on where and when you grow up.
Huh, yeah. I guess that makes sense. Different cultures and all that.
For sure. In fact, our first stop on this deep dive is going to take us all the way to the Samoan Islands back in the 1920s.
Wow, that's a long way back. What was childhood like there?
Well, imagine a world where formal schooling wasn't really a thing.
No school. So how did they learn?
That's the fascinating part. Kids in Samoa learned mostly through observation and hands-on experience. They were super integrated into the daily life of the community.
So instead of sitting in a classroom, they were out there learning by doing.
Exactly. It was all about practical skills and knowledge. I bet it was a totally different kind of education than what we're used to.
I can only imagine. So where did gender roles come into play in all of this?
Well, those hands-on experiences were actually deeply connected to their gender roles.
Oh, interesting. How so?
From a young age, girls were often responsible for taking care of younger siblings and helping with household chores.
Okay, so like caregiving and domestic tasks.
Exactly. Boys, on the other hand, would start learning more outdoor work like fishing and farming a lot earlier.
So their tasks were more physically demanding.
It's almost like those early experiences laid the groundwork for what was expected of them as adults,
Yeah.
like it was prepping them for their future roles in the community. What do you think?
Yeah, that makes sense. It's not necessarily about fairness or anything, but rather how their upbringing prepared them for their specific roles in Samoan society.
So it was all very intentional. Makes you wonder how much of that was a conscious decision by the adults and how much was just tradition passed down over generations.
That's a tough question. Probably a mix of both, right? There's intentional teaching, but also a lot of just absorbing these expectations without even realizing it.
That's true. Like, I remember as a kid, I was obsessed with maps and globes, and my parents, without even thinking about it, would get me all these books about explorers and different cultures. It
Yeah.
definitely played a role in my love for travel and learning about the world.
See? Subtle influences can make a big impact. And speaking of different cultures, let's hop over to Madhya Pradesh, India in the 1960s.
Okay, another time travel adventure. I'm ready.
We'll see a really different approach to childhood there, especially when it comes to education.
I'm all ears. Tell me more.
Well, one of the most noticeable things was the separation of boys and girls, particularly in schools.
Oh, wow. How did that work?
Girls often had their own separate courtyard for playing and hanging out, kind of secluded from everything else. Meanwhile, boys were free to roam the streets.
That's such a contrast. It really makes you think about the messages those physical spaces were sending about how boys and girls were supposed to behave.
Exactly. It reflected a lot about their societal norms. Like the girls' secluded space could be seen as prioritizing their safety and protection. It emphasized their modesty and, in a way, vulnerability.
So there was this idea that girls needed to be sheltered and protected.
Yeah, exactly. On the flip side, the boys being out and about suggested more emphasis on their independence and freedom to explore.
Makes you wonder if the girls ever felt limited or frustrated by those restrictions. And did the boys ever feel pressure to live up to that whole image of being carefree and independent?
That's a good question. It's tough to say for sure, but it's clear that those physical spaces definitely reinforced those expectations for them. Oh, and it's worth noting that when girls did go out, they often went in groups.
Maybe for safety
Hmm,
or to avoid getting unwanted attention.
could be both. It shows how safety was a big concern for them. And, those concerns are still so relevant today. It's a reminder that those issues of gender-based violence and discrimination, those are things we're still dealing with around the world.
It's true. It's heavy stuff, but it's important to talk about. So we've seen how different cultures view childhood and how even something like the physical space kids occupy can send strong messages about their roles. Now, I'm curious to see how those messages play out in other parts of childhood.
Well, we've been talking about the differences between boys and girls, so it's only natural to look at the toys and games they play. It might seem like a small thing, but it says a lot about how we shape those roles.
Oh, absolutely. I remember as a kid being so puzzled why my brother got all the cool trucks and building sets while I was stuck with dolls and tea sets. It's funny now, but those choices can really impact how kids see themselves and their place in the world.
You're so right. And it goes beyond just personal preference. It reflects those deep-seated societal expectations about what boys and girls should be interested in, and ultimately what roles they're expected to fill when they grow up.
Like we're giving them a script for their lives based on their gender. Is that too simplistic a way to put it?
Maybe a little. It's not always deliberate or like, here's your script. But those little choices can seriously influence a kid's development. It affects what they dream of, their confidence, even what careers they might choose.
So how do we break free from that? Do we ban certain toys or force kids to play with stuff they're not into? Or is there a better way?
It's not about forcing anything. It's about opening up their world and challenging those fixed ideas.
So more options, less boxes.
Exactly. It's about making sure a girl who loves building isn't labeled as different and a boy who loves playing dress up isn't made fun of. We got to give them that freedom to explore.
I'm all about that. You mentioned careers. I'm curious how much those early play experiences actually impact the paths we choose later on.
There's actually tons of research on this, and it shows those early experiences can be super influential. Like, studies have shown that girls who play with more building and spatial toys do better in STEM subjects later.
Makes total sense. They're building those spatial skills early on. But does that mean a boy who loves playing dress up is destined for a career in fashion?
Not necessarily. It's more about providing a wide range of possibilities. A boy who enjoys dress up might develop amazing creativity and empathy. Those are valuable skills no matter what they do, not just fashion.
That's such a good point. It's about seeing those interests as strengths, not limitations. We've talked about a lot today, from childhood in Samoa to the impact of toys. Before we jump into our next concept, what's sticking out to you so far?
It's crazy how everything is connected. The culture we're raised in, the stuff we experience, even the toys we play with, it all shapes how we see gender roles. And those roles, in turn, impact our whole lives. The jobs we choose, our relationships, everything.
Like this crazy web we're constantly trying to navigate.
Yeah.
And speaking of navigating, there's a huge part of the gender roles conversation that often gets missed, the whole world of housework and caregiving.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's often taken for granted, especially since it's typically seen as women's work, but it's the backbone of families and societies,
100%. And so often it's undervalued, like it's just expected and not even seen as real work. But before we get into that, we have a question from our listener. They're wondering, if those early childhood experiences are so powerful, can we actually change these deeply ingrained gender roles? Or are we kind of stuck with what we're raised with?
That is such a great question. It gets at the core of what we're discussing. The short answer is yes. We can definitely challenge and change those roles.
So there's hope.
Totally. It won't be easy, though. Those expectations are woven into our cultures and systems.
So how do we start chipping away at them? Do we need big policy changes? Or is it more about individual people changing how they think?
It's both, actually. We need big changes and individual efforts. For example, making childcare more affordable can really help women participate more in the workforce.
Right, it takes a village.
Yeah. And at the same time, we need to challenge those unconscious biases that make us think women are just naturally better at caregiving.
It's about recognizing those ideas are not about biology, but centuries of social conditioning. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's get back to this whole housework and caregiving thing. Where should we start?
Well, I think we should start by looking at how we see and value this kind of work.
Okay, let's unpack that. What do you mean by perceive and value?
Well, think about it. When we say work, we usually think of jobs that pay, jobs that contribute to the economy.
Right, the stuff you get a paycheck for.
Exactly. But housework, caring for others, all those things that keep a home running, they're often seen as invisible.
It's true. Like, we expect it to just happen magically.
And it's not just time and energy. It takes skills and planning and emotional intelligence.
It's a full-on job. I wonder, how did this division even start? Was it always assumed that women would handle the house while men were out in the world?
It's a long and complicated history. One theory is that as societies became more industrialized, men took on the jobs in factories and offices, and women were kind of left at home.
So those roles just stuck.
Pretty much. It's been hard to shake off, even with more and more women entering the workforce.
It's like those childhood expectations we talked about. They just carry over into adulthood. Speaking of which, there was this story I read about a family and their domestic helper, Mangala.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one. It really shows how we often don't recognize the value of housework.
Right. The family didn't see the work their mother did as real work because she wasn't getting paid for it. They just expected it of her.
And that's not unique to them. A lot of cultures have this deep-rooted belief that women are naturally meant for housework and caregiving, so it doesn't need to be acknowledged or compensated for.
But that's the problem, right?
Yeah.
If we keep undervaluing this work, it keeps women stuck with a bigger burden. It's not just about fairness. It has real economic consequences, too.
Absolutely. If we don't value unpaid care work, it prevents women from participating fully in the paid workforce. They might have to work fewer hours, take jobs that pay less, or even leave the workforce entirely to manage their responsibilities at home.
It's a lose-lose situation all around. There are some shocking statistics that really show this.
Oh, wow. Tell me.
Get this, in Haryana and Tamil Nadu in India, women were working way more hours each week than men when you include housework and caregiving. Like, we're talking hours more.
That's a huge difference. It just highlights that double burden so many women face. They're expected to do it all, both at home and in a paid job.
It's not sustainable. It's like we're setting them up to fail. Here's a thought experiment. What if everyone who does housework and caregiving just went on strike for a day? What do you think would happen?
Whoa, that's a big one. I think everything would stop working. Businesses would struggle, families would be in chaos, everyone would suddenly realize how crucial this invisible work really is.
It's like the air we breathe. We don't really notice it until it's gone. But talking about all this inequality can be a bit of a downer. Is there any hope for change? Are there societies that have actually figured this out?
Absolutely. Some societies are making progress. Scandinavian countries, for example, have a long history of social policies that really support families and promote gender equality.
So what are they doing differently? What can we learn from them?
One big difference is that they see caregiving as everyone's responsibility, not just a woman's job. They have amazing parental leave policies for both moms and dads, affordable childcare options, and they really emphasize work-life balance.
Wow, that's impressive. But I bet it takes a lot of effort to make those kinds of changes.
Oh, for sure. It's not a quick fix, but it proves it is possible to create a system that's fairer. There are also cool initiatives happening in other places. Like in India, they're working on creating more Anganwadis, which are childcare centers, especially in rural areas.
Oh yeah, I've heard about those. How do they work?
Basically, they give kids a safe and caring place to be. That allows moms to work or do other stuff knowing their kids are taken care of.
So everyone wins.
Yeah.
But are there any downsides to these Anganwadis? Are there enough of them? Do they have enough funding? Do they actually reach the people who need them the most?
All good questions. And they highlight how tricky it can be to make these programs work. Anganwadis have tons of potential, but there are challenges like ensuring quality, making sure everyone can access them, and keeping them going in the long run.
It's never a perfect solution, but at least it's a step in the right direction. And it shows that governments are starting to see how important it is to invest in childcare support. But it can't just be about government programs, right? What about businesses? Can they help promote gender equality?
Totally. Businesses have a huge role to play here. They can create policies that help working parents, like flexible work schedules, on-site childcare, and paid leave for both moms and dads.
That makes a ton of sense. If businesses are more supportive, it helps even the playing field. But sometimes I wonder, is it enough to just focus on external stuff like policies? Or do we need people to actually change how they think about all of this?
You hit the nail on the head. For true equality, attitudes and beliefs have to change. We have to challenge those deep-rooted stereotypes that hold everyone back.
It's not just about changing the rules, it's about changing how we see the whole game. We have another question from a listener. They're asking how to raise their kids to be more aware of these issues and challenge gender stereotypes.
Love that question. It's all about starting early and being mindful of the messages we send.
So what can parents do?
Expose your kids to all sorts of experiences. Encourage them to follow their passions, no matter what's considered normal for their gender. And most importantly, set a good example in your own relationships.
Yeah.
Leading by example. It's about creating an environment where those stereotypes are constantly challenged and questioned. You know, there's one thing that's always stuck with me, those posters and images of women breaking free from chains. What do you think those chains represent? And how can we break them?
That's a powerful image to think about. To me, those chains represent all the limitations placed on people by societal expectations.
Like all those unspoken rules.
Yes, and the way women's contributions are often overlooked, and all that fear and insecurity that can prevent people from being their true selves.
It's a reminder that real freedom means breaking free from those constraints. But where do we even begin? It can feel overwhelming.
I get it, it can be daunting, but I think it all starts with ourselves. We can look at our own biases, challenge the way things are, and speak up for change in our own little corners of the world.
So we all have a part to play in making things more just and equal. But before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to acknowledge all the progress we've made. It's easy to get discouraged, but we've come a long way in terms of gender equality. You're so right. We have a lot to celebrate. Women have made incredible progress in education, work, and leadership.
It's true. And those achievements pave the way for the next generation.
And we can't forget about all the people who fought so hard for those changes. It reminds us that what we do, even the small stuff, can make a difference.
And that we're all in this together, right? Creating a truly gender-equal world means working together, challenging the status quo, and committing to building a world where everyone can truly thrive.
Absolutely. We need everyone on board.
Well said. And on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive for today, but we'll continue this important conversation in our next episode.
It's a reminder that we're all part of this journey. Creating a truly gender-equal society requires everyone to pitch in, to challenge the way things are, and to commit to a world where everyone has the chance to be their best selves.
That's a great way to put it. And I think that's a perfect place to wrap up this part of our deep dive. But don't worry, we're not done yet. We'll be back soon to continue exploring this fascinating topic. So stay tuned, folks.
Absolutely. We've got to keep the conversation going.
We do. And, it's inspiring to see how much progress has been made, but it can also feel a bit overwhelming, right? Like, what can we as individuals actually do to make a difference? It feels like such a huge issue.
Oh, I hear you. It's easy to feel that way. But honestly, even the little things we do can have a ripple effect. It starts with being aware of our own biases, those ingrained stereotypes we all carry around.
So being more self-aware, like how do we actually do that?
Pay attention to the language you use. Do you ever catch yourself saying stuff like, boys will be boys? Or making assumptions about what girls and boys are naturally good at?
Oh, yeah. I've definitely said things like that without thinking.
Right. It seems harmless, but those phrases can actually reinforce those stereotypes we're trying to break free from.
It's like those little things we do and say without even realizing it.
Exactly. It's about catching ourselves and making a conscious effort to change those patterns. It's not about being perfect. It's about being more mindful.
So language is a big one. What else can we do in our everyday lives to make a difference?
Think about the media you and your kids are consuming: books, movies, TV shows. Do they show a range of gender roles? Do they challenge stereotypes, or do they just reinforce them?
It's like we're shaping their understanding of the world
Yeah.
through the stories and images they see.
Exactly. We have a responsibility to be mindful of the messages they're absorbing.
It's true. But what happens when our kids encounter those stereotypes out in the real world? Like at school or with friends? How do we prepare them for that?
Open and honest communication is key. Talk to them about gender stereotypes and why they can be hurtful. Encourage them to speak up if they see something that's not right.
So give them the tools and the confidence to challenge those norms.
Exactly. Empower them to be allies and advocates for equality. It's about raising a generation that's not afraid to call out injustice.
I love that. But sometimes it feels like an uphill battle, Like, how do we deal with people who are stuck in those traditional ways of thinking?
I get it. Those conversations can be tough. But I think approaching them with empathy and respect, even when it's hard, can make a difference. Try to understand where they're coming from. Share your own perspective in a way that's open and honest, without judgment. You might not change their mind right away, but you might plant a seed that could lead to change down the line.
It's about having those tough conversations, even when it's uncomfortable. But sometimes I wonder, is individual change enough? Don't we also need bigger, systemic changes to really shift things?
You're absolutely right. We need both individual action and system-wide change. We need policies that support equality, like affordable childcare, equal pay, and paid parental leave for everyone.
Those are crucial for creating a level playing field. But I imagine making those changes is a long and challenging process.
It is, but we can make a difference by speaking up, educating ourselves and others, and supporting those organizations that are fighting for equality. We need to make our voices heard and demand action from our leaders.
So it's about being informed, engaged citizens, and using our voices to push for a better future.
Well said. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to highlight all the progress that's been made. It's easy to get discouraged, but it's important to celebrate how far we've come.
I agree. We've come a long way in terms of gender equality. Women have broken barriers in education, the workforce, and leadership.
And those achievements are paving the way for future generations.
Exactly. And let's not forget all the amazing individuals who fought so hard to make those changes happen. It's a reminder that every action, no matter how small, can contribute to a bigger movement.
It's about recognizing that collective effort, that shared commitment to building a world where everyone has the chance to thrive, regardless of gender. And that's what this deep dive has been all about, exploring those complex issues, challenging those old ways of thinking, and inspiring each other to keep pushing for a more just and equal world.
Absolutely. It's been a fantastic journey.
It really has. So to everyone listening, we hope this conversation has given you food for thought, sparked some new ideas, and maybe even inspired you to take action. Keep questioning, keep challenging those norms, and keep striving for a better future. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.